want you all to know that I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I could do a really good job. And I wouldn't be doing this if I thought that either of the two major parties were actually talking about the problems that we're facing and the solutions that go along with them. And very quickly, I think I'm different in many, many ways. And that would start off with not bombing Iran. Let's not bomb Iran. Let's get out of Afghanistan tomorrow and bring the troops back. I think that marriage equality is a constitutionally guaranteed right, that it is a federal issue. I would have never signed the Patriot Act. I would have never allowed for Homeland Security to be in existence. I think it's incredibly redundant. And these drones that we're flying now in this country, what's that all about? Well, I think that more than anything has to do with a continuation of the war on drugs. And I would have never signed the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows for you and I as U.S. citizens to be arrested and detained without being charged. This is why we fought wars in this country. And I absolutely, adamantly believe that unless we balance the federal budget, we're going to find ourselves in a monetary collapse in this country. That there's no escaping the mathematics of continuing to borrow and print money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar that we're spending. And so to cut government by 43%, that's a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending. And that needs to start with a debate on Medicaid and Medicare and military spending, all of which I would propose 43% reductions in those categories. You know, you had two candidates on stage that were debating the other night over who's going to spend more money on Medicare, when Medicare is a system that you and I pay $30 into, and we get a $100 benefit. And by extension, we pay $30,000 into Medicare and get a $100,000 benefit. In no way is this sustainable. And yet, we seem to have our heads in the sand. I don't think American people have their heads in the sand, but I think American politicians have their heads in the sand. And that they want us to believe that the Tooth Fairy, that the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus are coming. And they're not. This is going to involve mutual sacrifice on the part of all of us to fix this. But I think we all recognize that, and we need to engage in this. I'm also the only candidate running that is proposing to eliminate income tax, eliminate corporate tax, abolish the IRS, and replace all of it with one federal consumption tax, which I think really reboots the American economy for the next 100 years. It's the answer when it comes to our exports, because we're going to bleed out 23% worth of non-transparent federal tax out of all goods and services that we export. So it's really the answer when it comes to China. It's really the answer when it comes to American jobs. Because in a zero corporate tax rate environment, if the private sector doesn't create tens of millions of jobs, I don't know what it takes to create tens of millions of jobs. And it also ends up to be cost neutral. So it really, in my opinion, reboots the American economy. And all these issues aren't being talked about at all today. And they should be talked about front and center. And then I'm the only candidate running for President of the United States that wants to end the drug war now. Legalize marijuana. Colorado has this incredible opportunity, and I hope you all realize this. Colorado has the opportunity to change drug policy worldwide. I mean, this is what's at stake here. And Colorado gets it. And I go back to 6 years ago, Denver voting to decriminalize marijuana on a campaign based on marijuana being safer than alcohol. 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. That's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that should be the focus. I remember meeting with judges in Portland, Oregon, when I was governor of New Mexico. I didn't know how that meeting was going to go, but I show up, There's 6 judges there. And what they said was, you know, we're here to tell you that we think that what you're saying on the drug issue is just right on. But we would like to share with you some stories here that you might pass on to others to allow others to better understand the drug issue. They said that methamphetamine is really the terrible, horrible drug. You use methamphetamine, your behavior gets altered, you do bad things, and really our courts are filled with people that do bad things on methamphetamine. But they said methamphetamine is the best example we can think of a prohibition drug. Wouldn't exist but for prohibition because it's cheap, it's easy to make, and so the consequences fall disparagingly on the poor. They said, we're not suggesting the following, but if cocaine were legal, people would use cocaine instead of methamphetamine without the negative behavioral consequence. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful, though, if the government actually told the truth when it came to drug policy? And the truth when it comes to cocaine is that if you use cocaine, cocaine literally puts holes in your heart. It does. So the profile of a person my age that's used cocaine their entire lives, actually, they've died from a heart attack to this point. Whitney Houston is really kind of the poster child of somebody who uses cocaine their entire lives. At some point, they just die from a heart attack. So here we are. We're talking about legalizing marijuana in Colorado. We are talking about the initiative 301, Regulate Marijuana. I think it's really important that people understand the distinction between regulating, taxing, controlling a substance that if it isn't controlled, that's the prohibition aspect. I remember as governor of New Mexico talking to an editor of one of the huge national newspapers in this country. And he says to me, he says, you want to legalize pot? He said, when I was in college, I smoked some pot, and I walked into the grocery store, and the pictures of the roaches on the cans came alive. And you want to legalize this stuff? And I said, my point exactly. You smoked some LSD weed, and really what you were after was just some beer weed. But this is a prohibition phenomenon. Quality, quantity, unknown. So controlling it, regulating it, taxing it. Colorado has this incredible, and I know you are all activists, and so I implore you to double your activism in the time remaining, because what's at stake here is the rest of the world is going to follow Colorado's lead. Now, I'm out all over the country, and I am saying that I think marijuana is at a tipping point in this country. 50% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. Why is the number so high? Because we're talking about it. And I say this everywhere I go. Colorado is going to be the tipping point. It's on the ballot in Colorado. Regulate marijuana like alcohol. I think it's going to pass. And here's the dynamics of Colorado passing that is when everybody in the whole country gets on an airplane to fly into Denver for the weekend to chill out, the phenomenon of other states not following in line will quickly go by the wayside. So I applaud all of you. I applaud all of you, and back to this notion of redoubling your efforts with the time left. Typically, marijuana, California, you've all seen it before. Typically, the support fades at the end. I don't know why that's the case, but for people to talk about it, for you all being activists, pressing the issue, talking about it, let's control it. Let's regulate it. Let's tax it. Let's label products that, from a prohibition standpoint, don't get labeled. So we're talking about safer. And I've never been a hypocrite on this issue. I smoked marijuana when I grew up. I'm one of the 100 million Americans who have smoked marijuana. And I had such hope for President Obama when he was elected in 2008. I had such hope because he has smoked marijuana. And if in the area of gay rights, in the area of military non-intervention, in the area of drug policy, I was just certain that all three of those areas were going to dramatically improve, all in a good way. Well, he promised that he wasn't going to crack down on medical marijuana facilities. And where legislatures, where citizens voted to implement those programs. Well, he's cracked down on facilities in Colorado, and he's cracked down on facilities in California. So what I always say about President Obama, you know, the words out of his mouth are like music. I don't know if I can disagree with anything that he says. It's just that the actions don't match up at all with the words. So here it is. I want to, you know, this is very specific. 301, yes. 64, yes. Redouble your efforts and make these happen for the rest of us in this country. Make this happen for the rest of us in this country. The opportunity here is unbelievable. The U.S. has cast a net over the world when it comes to drug policy. Nowhere is it legal to smoke marijuana. Nowhere. Because the U.S. has cast a net over the world that if you legalize drugs, there is the heavy anvil of doing no trade with the United States if that's the case. So if it starts within this country, if it starts with Colorado, you know, that's the first domino. That's the first domino of 50 dominoes, and the opportunity here is just out the roof. So thank you very, very much for taking your time here. I want to make a pitch that you have to be hearing it. You know, if I vote for Johnson, it's a wasted vote. You know, I think a wasted vote is voting for somebody that you don't believe in. I think that's a wasted vote. Voting for the person you believe in, that's how you change things in this country. And more votes for Gary Johnson, among a whole lot of other things, is saying, look, it's Americans shouting, we want rational drug policy in this country. And I think that once we legalize marijuana, and it's just a matter of time, I'm believing it's going to happen here. Once we do that, we take giant steps toward rational drug policy with regard to all the other drugs. And it starts with looking at drugs first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue.
Gary, my name is John Fly. I'm running for state representative here in West Fort Collins. And one of the main concerns that I've heard from the other side of the spectrum, if Amendment 64 does pass, and I'm not speaking out against it, I do think that we need more sensible drug policy in the United States. And one of the main concerns that people have brought to my attention is, well, once Colorado does pass the law, it does look like we're going to pass the law. And I'm willing to work with that legislation to provide safer access for people if I'm elected. One of the main concerns that people have is, well, what about the federal lawsuits that are going to be brought upon the state of Colorado? Can you go into any kind of detail in that kind of a frame of mind?
Well, just generally speaking, that was the phenomenon with the prohibition of alcohol also. I mean, it was New York saying, we're no longer going to uphold federal prohibition laws on alcohol. If you, the federal government, wants to have at it, you can have at it. Yes, what you're saying is correct, but you know what? It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And other states will follow. Another phenomenon with the prohibition of alcohol, one of the unstated stories was all of those individuals that were convicted of alcohol crime, as tens of millions of Americans have been convicted on drug crime. There's the whole pardoning process that needs to take place. And there's the whole commutation of sentences for those in jail for nonviolent, victimless crime. And I don't consider selling drugs as creating victims. I think the person that sells drugs is the person who yesterday was the user, but who is the seller today because the seller got arrested and is serving time now. I mean, we've gotten really, really good in this country for when it comes to arresting people selling drugs. Really good.
Since you're like one of the leaders of the Liberty Movement now, what are your plans for the future? Are you considering running for presidential candidate?
I am. I know that sounds crazy, but I am. And the notion is that these issues are way too important. And I'd like to think that these issues are based on the truth. Our military interventions, for example, have us with hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that but for these military interventions wouldn't otherwise exist. So offering up a prediction, Romney or Obama wins, we're going to have a heightened police state, we're going to find ourselves in a continued state of war, military interventions, we're going to find ourselves continuing to borrow and spend money in a way that is unsustainable and will result in a monetary collapse if not checked.
What would it take for you to be able to be part of the presidential debates in 4 years?
Well, there's one presidential debate left. We filed suit in Washington, D.C. Just yesterday, and we did file in California on the presidential debate earlier. So we'll see. Of course, you can't be successful if you don't file the suit. And by the way, the Presidential Debates Commission is not a governmental agency. It's a private organization made up of Democrats and Republicans with no interest whatsoever in seeing a third party on stage. I don't know how many of you have watched all the debates. I have. I've watched every single debate. Can you ever think of a series of debates where drug policy has not had one word of mention in the debates? One word. And the reason is because of me. That's the reason.
But they also have mentioned the NDAA, but that aside, my question for you is what are your thoughts on what happened to Jill Stein last week and whether or not this is a situation where it's obvious the two parties in control are actually starting to take out hostilities and the threats to their power?
Well, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go to the debates and get arrested. She wanted to go to the debates and get arrested, and she did. And that's not my tact. It's just not my tact. So it was a very peaceful protest on her part, and I thought that the law enforcement was very, very respectful of, look, ladies, we're going to arrest you. This is what you want, so we're going to arrest you. Anyway.
Do you believe that our monetary system and our economy can be repaired, or is it inevitable that it's going to collapse?
No, I think that, and it may be inevitable because we still have a $16 trillion debt, but if we're going to fix it, the only chance we have of fixing it is to balance the federal budget now. If we balance the federal budget now and enact the fair tax, I think we will have an explosion in growth that would portend being able to pay back the $16 trillion.
I hear a lot from Obama and Romney kind of trying to one-up each other on blaming other countries for economic problems, bashing China especially. Do you have a clear position on American trade policy?
Yeah, free trade. The notion of free trade. Tariffs against Look, who benefits from the lower cost of goods and services being sent to us from China? Well, we do. Fundamentally, we benefit from lower cost of goods and services. Who takes it on the chin for those lower costs? Well, China does if they subsidize. If there's any unfair practice, they're the ones taking it on the chin. And if you have a genuine free market approach to trade, it works itself out. Wherever government intervenes, in my opinion, there are unintended consequences. And tariffs, you and I end up paying for tariffs. That's just the bottom line.
I've heard recently that RT America is going to be hosting a third-party debate. Do you plan on attending that?
Yes, I'm going to attend the RT debate, yes.
Do you know when that is?
23rd, maybe? Just next week. Tuesday. Larry King is going to moderate? Larry King is moderating. Yeah.
How many misdemeanor marijuana offenses did you pardon when you had that authority in the state of New Mexico?
I pardoned hundreds for those who had served out their sentences and had a clean record since that time. I had issued hundreds of pardons. I also put it out that I would commute sentences for those individuals that were behind bars on victimless nonviolent crime. That is when I came to find out that state prisons, for the most part, although the majority of people behind bars in state prison are there for drug-related crime, usually it has to do with a gun involved, or it has to do with other crime revolving around drugs. That's where I came to recognize that the profile of 70% of federal prison are individuals who have sold small amounts of drugs on numerous occasions and been caught. So I think, as President of the United States, commuting federal sentences, that would actually have a big, huge impact. But I only commuted 2 sentences, but issued hundreds of pardons for those that had been convicted and served their time.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions.
What's your take on regulating harder drugs than marijuana, drugs that are more likely to make a user harm other people?
Well, I'll just point at 2 countries, one Holland, one Portugal. 10 years ago, Portugal decriminalized all drugs. Decriminalized all drugs. And I'm pointing out something that I think you all recognize anyway. Holland effectively has decriminalized drugs. They haven't decriminalized drugs, they've just turned their back on actually doing that. But Portugal, 10 years ago, decriminalized all drugs, and they did it in response to a heroin epidemic in the country. And over the last 10 years, Portugal has documented a 50% reduction in heroin use. Zurich, Switzerland has a heroin maintenance program. And rather than me tell you how that works, I met with the chief of police from Zurich, Switzerland. This was a number of years ago in Albuquerque. He said, when we came out with a heroin maintenance program in Zurich, Switzerland, I've been in law enforcement my entire life. All my friends were in law enforcement. This was the dumbest thing that they could have possibly done. Death, disease, crime, corruption was going to skyrocket as a result of free heroin. He said, I'm here in Albuquerque to tell you that it has worked positively, dramatically. Zurich is a much better place to live today. So I think, back to other drugs, would we be better off if we legalized all drugs tomorrow? Yes, we would be, because 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. But we're not going to do that. We're going to start with marijuana, and I think Colorado is the tipping point. We're at a tipping point. I think when we legalize marijuana and realize that the sky doesn't fall, police actually go out tomorrow and enforce real crime as opposed to victimless nonviolent crime, and that things are better. Then we start looking at other drugs and the problems associated with them. And it's always prohibition. Prohibition is always the killer. Quality, quantity, unknown. In the 60s, a dose of window pane acid, is like the size of a quarter of your small fingernail. And in the 60s, people were consuming pages, sheets of window pane acid, and they were jumping out of windows. Well, I guess, back to quality, quantity, unknown, prohibition is the killer. As governor of New Mexico, I went into Texas. I addressed a group in Texas. A guy stands up. He goes, "You're talking about heroin? You're talking about harm reduction strategies for heroin? There were There were 14 kids that died in my hometown in Texas from heroin overdose. And he storms out of the room. You could have heard a pin drop. And I said, look, I don't know what the story is here, but I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess that the person that was selling all these kids their heroin went away, got arrested, and that there was a new source that moved into town, and that visually they were taking the same dose, but that visual dose now killed them. And there were about 4 or 5 there that said that's exactly what happened. So prohibition is what kills.
And how would you respond to the Syrian crisis?
To the what?
Syrian crisis.
Syrian crisis. So right now we are funding the Syrian insurgents that are made up of jihadists. Did we learn nothing in Afghanistan where we funded Osama bin Laden? These are our military interventions that have resulted in hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that but for our military interventions would not exist. Our drones hit the target, but they also kill a lot of really innocent people by remote control. And if that happened in this country, if people in this room were killed, I would vow the rest of my life vengeance against the country that did that, including the loss of my own life to exact that vengeance. And that's exactly what the United States has created. We have become the bully, beyond bully. We're feared. We're feared for our trigger finger, as opposed to the beacon on the hill, as opposed to the country that stands up against the bully. Anyway, thank you all so much. Thank you for your active listening.